The bell above the restaurant door jingled as she stepped inside, black apron pressed neatly over her crisp white shirt, heels clicking against the polished marble floor. A hush seemed to ripple through the air, subtle but noticeable. Not because she was new, not because she was nervous, but because something about her presence cut through the usual hum of high-end chatter like a sharp note in a quiet symphony. She was tall, her skin a deep, radiant brown that seemed to glow under the warm chandeliers, her hair pulled back into a tight braid that swung with each confident step. There were eyes on her immediately, the rich, the bored, the curious. But she didn't notice them. She had one target tonight. Across the room, a table near the corner, secluded yet commanding a perfect view of the restaurant, sat the billionaire. He leaned back in his chair, expensive watch catching the light as he casually flicked through his phone. Next to him, his friend, a sharp-eyed Korean entrepreneur with a cold, calculating smile, nodded occasionally at the conversation they were having. Both were surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and untouched plates, as if the world outside their bubble didn't matter. "Miss?" His voice carried that trademark arrogance that came with money, power, and an unshakable belief that the world owed him respect. "Bring us the best table wine you have. And make it quick. I have a meeting with someone more important than a waiter's schedule." Her lips curved into the smallest, imperceptible smile, almost invisible. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm, even with the subtle fire beneath it. "I can help you choose something remarkable, sir. But first, may I suggest a little game?" The billionaire laughed, the kind of full, easy laugh that fills a room and dares anyone to challenge it. "A game? You're a waitress. You think I have time for games?" Her eyes sparkled, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet amusement. "No, sir. I think you might need one." His friend leaned in, curious. "What game?" She walked slowly to the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Every movement was deliberate. Every eye in the room now followed her, some out of intrigue, others out of the subconscious recognition that something unexpected was about to happen. "Shall we play chess?" she asked softly, almost a whisper, yet every word landed in the billionaire's mind like a bell. "Chess? In a luxury restaurant?" The billionaire snorted, a little offended, a little amused. "Chess? Darling, I don't play games with the help. But, sure, why not? Let's see what you've got." She set the chessboard on the table, unwrapping a polished wooden set as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her hands moved with precision, placing each piece deliberately, each movement a quiet statement. She knew what she was doing. "Wait," the Korean entrepreneur said, intrigued despite himself. "She's setting up the board. Are we actually going to do this?" "Apparently," the billionaire said, still laughing, the sound rich and dismissive. "This should be fun. Let's see if she can at least survive 3 moves without embarrassing herself." The waitress Corin, as the name tag revealed, leaned slightly closer. Checkmate is rarely about surviving. It's about seeing what the other person overlooks. "Careful, sir, you might be too confident." He chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "Confidence won't save you either, girl." Minutes passed. The pieces moved. He played aggressively, fast, confident. Every pawn, knight, and bishop went exactly where he expected it to. He laughed again, louder this time, glancing around to ensure everyone in the restaurant noticed how effortlessly he dominated a simple waitress. Corin didn't rush. She observed quietly, her chin resting lightly on her fist, eyes tracing every flick of his hand, every twitch in his expression, every small muscle in his jaw. She didn't make her move too soon. That would be amateurish. Instead, she waited. Then, in a single smooth motion, she touched the queen. Not randomly. Not recklessly. But deliberately, with precision. The billionaire barely had time to react before his king was cornered. "Checkmate," she said softly, almost under her breath. The words didn't need to be loud. They carried. They cut. The room went silent. He blinked, a laugh caught in his throat, disbelief flashing across his sharp features. "What?" "I said, checkmate," she repeated, her tone calm, almost teasing. Sometimes, the most obvious move is not the best one. Sometimes, the one you dismiss is the one who wins. For a moment, he stared at the board, at her, at the laughter he'd been so used to evoking from others. And then, something shifted. A flicker of respect, almost too late to recognize, passed over his face. The Korean friend looked stunned. Did she just beat you? He opened his mouth, but no words came. His laughter had evaporated. The room seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in a long time, the billionaire sat silent, confronted by someone who refused to be dismissed, someone who had transformed a casual insult into a lesson without even raising her voice. Corin's eyes met his, steady, unyielding. Sir, I suggest you remember this: arrogance is loud, but observation is quiet. And quiet can win. The billionaire's lips twitched. A laugh started, hesitant, like a man tasting something unfamiliar. Interesting, he said. Very interesting. But Corin didn't smile. She didn't move. She simply collected the chessboard, placed the pieces back in their box, and walked away, leaving the billionaire with his thoughts, his arrogance slightly cracked, his amusement replaced by curiosity. And just like that, the game was no longer about chess. It was about recognition. About respect. About understanding that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who will change everything. That night, the restaurant didn't just witness a chess match. It witnessed the start of a subtle revolution, one quiet move at a time, orchestrated by a waitress who refused to be invisible. The restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm, the gentle clinking of fine china, the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter that didn't quite reach the corners of the room. But at that secluded table in the corner, nothing was usual. The billionaire sat back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes fixed on the spot where Corin had disappeared moments ago. The chessboard still lingered in his mind, each piece, each move, replaying like a memory that refused to fade. He had been laughed at before, sure. He had been outmaneuvered in business negotiations, tricked in high-stakes deals, but this was different. The audacity of a waitress, the calm precision of her movements, the soft but lethal confidence in her voice, it gnawed at him. Do you see it? The Korean entrepreneur asked, leaning back, his tone a mixture of curiosity and caution. She didn't just beat you. She humiliated you. He waved the thought away, though a tightness in his jaw betrayed him. Humiliated is a strong word, he muttered, but even as he said it, he felt the sting. The game was simple, yet the lesson it carried, subtle but undeniable. What is her name again? The entrepreneur continued, tilting his head, fascinated despite himself. Corin, the billionaire said, almost reluctantly. Black Waitress, yes, I remember. Corin moved through the restaurant like a shadow in motion, her apron tied neatly, tray in hand, yet every eye followed her. She noticed, but did not acknowledge it. There was no arrogance in her, only a quiet mastery of the space she occupied. She served with precision, took orders with care, smiled when appropriate, but her mind was elsewhere. The game had just begun. Back at the table, the billionaire found his attention drifting. He watched her move from table to table, the grace in her posture, the subtle confidence in her gestures, the way she made her presence known without demanding it. A flicker of something unfamiliar rose inside him, not attraction, not desire, but curiosity. Intrigue. Later that evening, as the restaurant began to empty and the golden glow of chandeliers softened against the darkened windows, he stood and approached her. Miss Corin? His voice was measured, controlled. She turned slowly, assessing him, her expression unreadable. Yes, sir? He gestured toward a quiet corner of the restaurant. A word, if you have a moment. Her eyes flicked toward the corner, then back to him. Of course. She followed him, not out of obligation, but with the same calm authority she had carried all night. They sat, the space between them charged with a tension neither spoke of. He studied her as she crossed her legs, hands folded on her lap, posture straight yet relaxed. She met his gaze without flinching. I wanted to congratulate you, he began carefully. On the chess game. You were unexpected. Her lips curved slightly, a hint of amusement, but her eyes stayed sharp. Thank you, sir. That's kind of you to say. You know, most people, they would have walked away, he continued, his tone shifting slightly, less arrogance, more curiosity. Most people wouldn't have had the confidence to make a move like that in front of me. Corin's smile widened, subtle, almost imperceptible. Confidence is not about who is watching, sir. It's about understanding the board, and knowing your next move. He leaned back, intrigued. And what is your next move? She tilted her head, considering. That depends. Are you asking me as a billionaire, or as a man who underestimated me? He chuckled softly, a hint of admiration threading through it. Perhaps both. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged. The restaurant staff had finished cleaning, the last few patrons drifting away, yet the world seemed to shrink around their table. I have to admit, he said finally, you make me reconsider a lot of assumptions about people. About appearances. About capability. Corin's gaze didn't waver. Appearances are the easiest thing to manipulate, sir. But substance cannot be faked. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. And yet, most people don't notice until it's too late. You seem different. I've learned to watch, she said simply. Observation is the greatest advantage anyone can have. The rest is just noise. He studied her carefully, noting the clarity in her speech, the precision in her thoughts. He had seen confidence before, yes, but this was quiet, unshakable. It was the kind of confidence that didn't need approval, didn't crave recognition. It simply existed, undeniable and sharp. You're clever, he said, almost reluctantly. And dangerous, in a way. She laughed softly, not mocking, but amused. Dangerous? I prefer unpredictable. He smiled, leaning back, a rare vulnerability flickering in his eyes. Perhaps I underestimated you. Perhaps I need to pay more attention. Corin's eyes sparkled, the faintest glint of satisfaction there. But she didn't say more. Instead, she stood gracefully, signaling the end of the conversation. Thank you for your time, sir. I must return to work. As she walked away, he watched her, mind racing, heart uncomfortably aware that this simple waitress had just changed something inside him, a realization that control, arrogance, and money were no guarantee of dominance in every arena. Some games required more than wealth. Some games required wit. And she had more than enough. That night, as he sat in his private suite overlooking the city, the chessboard replayed in his mind. Every move she made. Every subtle shift. Every quiet, calculated decision. He realized, with a mixture of frustration and admiration, that this was only the beginning. Corin had played her first move. And he was now very much part of the game. The following week, the luxury restaurant hummed with its usual rhythm, but the energy around Corin had shifted. Staff exchanged glances whenever she passed, not out of gossip, but a quiet acknowledgement that something about her had changed the atmosphere. She moved with the same grace, same precision, same calm confidence, but now there was a subtle aura of anticipation around her, as though everyone sensed that something significant had recently unfolded, something that belonged to her alone. At a private corner table, the billionaire waited, fingers drumming on the polished mahogany. His Korean friend leaned forward, curiosity and irritation mingling in his sharp gaze. You're obsessed, he said bluntly. You can't tell me you're not thinking about that chess game every day. The billionaire chuckled softly, but it wasn't his usual arrogant laugh. It was quieter, less certain. Obsessed? Maybe. Or, maybe I just recognize talent when I see it. And she has it in spades. She's a waitress, the friend said, disbelief clear in his tone. You don't do this with people like her. People like her, he repeated slowly, voice low, contemplative. That's exactly why I do it. Corin entered then, carrying a tray of sparkling water, her gaze brief but sharp as it landed on the billionaire. She set the glasses down with the same calm precision she had shown the night before, acknowledging him with a small, polite nod. "Sir," she said, voice steady, "your table is ready, and I've noted your preferences for tonight." He smiled faintly, intrigued by the mix of respect and subtle dominance in her tone. "Corin," he said, "I have a proposal for you." She tilted her head slightly, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "A proposal?" "Yes. A game. Not chess this time, something more challenging. Something public." She arched an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. "And what kind of game would that be?" He leaned in, voice lowering, carrying the weight of his own confidence and curiosity. "A high-stakes wager. A challenge that requires strategy, observation, and skill. Are you willing to play?" Her lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. "I'm always willing to play. But I must know the rules first." He chuckled softly, leaning back as he spread his hands, the faint glint of his watch catching the light. "No rules beyond logic and wit. It's a game of perception. Of influence. And of reputation." For a long moment, she considered him, her mind calculating silently, every possibility weighing itself out. Then she nodded slowly. "Very well. I accept. But know this. I do not play to lose." The billionaire's smile widened, genuine this time, tinged with respect. "Good. I wouldn't have it any other way." That evening, as the restaurant filled with high-profile patrons, Corin moved with her usual calm authority, yet every table she approached became a subtle battlefield. Her charm, her wit, her intelligence, previously unnoticed by the wealthy and arrogant, now began to surface. A comment here, a question there, a suggestion that appeared casual but was carefully designed to provoke thought, to subtly shift perceptions. The billionaire watched, fascinated. She had the room in her hands without even touching the game board, and he realized that this was far more complex than the last match. Chess had been an isolated duel, tonight, it was a social arena. And Corin was not just surviving, it was clear she intended to dominate. "Interesting," the Korean friend muttered, watching her navigate a difficult table of executives. "She's influencing them without them realizing it." "Yes," the billionaire said, voice low. "And I'm realizing something else. The game isn't about winning money, influence, or even respect. It's about awareness. And she's teaching me something very important." Across the room, Corin paused, catching his gaze. Their eyes met briefly, and she nodded almost imperceptibly, a silent acknowledgement that she was aware of his attention, aware of his fascination, aware of the subtle power shift happening before him. As the night progressed, the billionaire realized that every interaction, every word Corin spoke, was a calculated move, yet executed with such finesse it appeared effortless. She was a master of observation, and he was both a player and an audience in her game. Finally, the moment came. A wealthy patron challenged her, attempting to undermine her subtly, questioning her recommendation for wine in front of the entire table. The room held its breath. Most waitstaff would have faltered, laughed nervously, or deferred. Not Corin. With a calm, precise voice, she corrected the misconception, delivering the information with authority and charm, transforming what could have been embarrassment into admiration. The patron, initially smug, now looked humbled, impressed, and perhaps a little shaken. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, absorbing the scene. For the first time, he realized that the stakes had shifted completely. This wasn't about arrogance, money, or even status, it was about understanding people, timing, and influence. And Corin? She walked past him once again, tray in hand, every movement deliberate, every glance charged with unspoken knowledge. She had won another round. Quietly. Elegantly. Unmistakably. As he watched her move, a strange mix of respect, fascination, and anticipation settled over him. He realized that this was no longer a simple game. The real challenge had begun, and he was deeply, irrevocably invested. That night, as he returned to his penthouse, he stared at the chessboard from the previous week, untouched, forgotten in the corner. But the lesson it carried had evolved. It was no longer about a single game. It was about a woman who refused to be dismissed, who could command attention, influence outcomes, and disrupt arrogance without raising her voice. And for the billionaire, that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The next evening, the restaurant's ambience had shifted. Patrons noticed it first in whispers, the way Corinne moved with a presence that was both commanding and invisible, the way even the wealthiest guests found themselves leaning in to hear her suggestions. It wasn't just service anymore, it was performance. Influence. A quiet assertion of intelligence that left everyone slightly unsettled yet intrigued. At the corner table, the billionaire watched, hands clasped together, eyes tracking every gesture. The Korean entrepreneur beside him shifted uneasily. "She's extraordinary," he muttered, barely audible. "She's orchestrating the entire room without touching a tray." The billionaire nodded slowly, his mind spinning. "It's not just skill. It's control. Observation. Timing. And she's enjoying every moment." Corinne approached a table of high-profile investors, her demeanor impeccable. One of them, a brash young tech mogul, tried to dominate the conversation, offering advice in a patronizing tone, clearly expecting her to defer. "Excuse me," Corinne said softly, tilting her head, voice even and deliberate. "May I suggest an alternative perspective?" The man smirked, clearly amused. "A waitress giving business advice? That's rich." Corinne's eyes didn't flicker. "I only offer what I've observed to be effective," she replied, calm, precise. Sometimes the simplest moves have the greatest impact. A subtle tension rippled through the table. The tech mogul tried to regain control, yet every word Corinne spoke seemed to redirect the conversation effortlessly, subtly dismantling his assumptions. Within minutes, the man's smirk faltered into reluctant admiration, and the other investors leaned forward, silently acknowledging her authority. At the corner table, the billionaire leaned back, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. He realized that Corinne wasn't just winning at individual interactions, she was controlling the perception of the room, quietly shifting power dynamics without confrontation, without arrogance. Then, she turned toward his table. Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. A challenge had been issued, unspoken but unmistakable. The billionaire leaned forward, intrigued, ready for whatever move she had planned next. Corinne approached, tray balanced effortlessly, and set it down with a quiet precision. "Sir, I believe you might enjoy a game of observation tonight," she said softly. "Observation?" he asked, curious, the first spark of competitive excitement lighting his eyes. "And how would we play that?" She tilted her head, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "By watching who notices what first, who reacts to subtle cues, and who understands the intentions behind actions. In short, by seeing the invisible." He leaned back, intrigued and slightly wary. "And who decides the winner?" Her smile was small, controlled, almost teasing. "That would be up to the board." She gestured subtly to the tables around them. "The game has already begun. Every patron, every gesture, every word, watch closely. Miss nothing." The billionaire glanced around. On the surface, the restaurant appeared calm. Polite chatter, clinking glasses, and the soft notes of a piano filled the air. But now, with Corinne's eyes upon him, he realized the dynamics had shifted. Every subtle interaction carried meaning. Every movement was potential strategy. For the next hour, Corinne moved through the restaurant with effortless grace, guiding, observing, influencing. She offered small suggestions, corrected misconceptions, and orchestrated subtle shifts in conversations, all while maintaining the guise of a simple waitress performing her duties. The billionaire watched, captivated. He realized that while he had thought himself the observer, he was now part of her game, reacting, adjusting, unsure where her strategy would strike next. Finally, the moment came. A wealthy patron, attempting to assert dominance through casual insults aimed at her knowledge, underestimated Corin's subtle intelligence. In one smooth, calm motion, she orchestrated a public display that exposed the man's ignorance without humiliating him outright. The result, the room shifted, respect quietly reallocated, and the billionaire felt a strange thrill of admiration and defeat simultaneously. She returned to his table, eyes steady, almost serene. "Observation, sir," she said softly. "It's a game everyone plays, whether they realize it or not. The difference is, some play consciously, and some react blindly." The billionaire's smile was slow, measured, tinged with both amusement and respect. "You've turned the room into your board," he said. "Every move calculated, every reaction anticipated. Brilliant." Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't speak. She simply collected her tray, moving with the same calm authority as before, leaving the billionaire to reflect on the subtle strike she had just executed, a strike that had altered the perception of everyone in the room, including him. That night, he returned to his penthouse, the city lights stretching infinitely before him, and sat in silence. The lesson was clear, and the realization unsettling: Corin was no ordinary waitress. She was strategic, patient, and powerful in ways he had never anticipated. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't just watching a game unfold. He was a participant, and he was dangerously behind. The city lights glimmered like diamonds spilling across the night, but inside the restaurant, a different kind of sparkle commanded attention. Corin moved with precision, carrying a tray of delicate desserts, her posture flawless, yet her mind was sharp, calculating. Tonight wasn't just about observation. Tonight was about influence, subtle disruption, and the beginning of a challenge no one in the room fully understood. The billionaire sat at his corner table, fingers brushing the edge of the chessboard from last week. He hadn't touched it since the first game, but the memory of Corin's first move still haunted him. Her confidence, her strategy, her calm intelligence all replayed in his mind like a cinematic highlight reel. He could no longer dismiss her as just a waitress. Every moment she spent in the restaurant felt like a move in a game he was desperate to understand. "She's something else," the Korean entrepreneur muttered, leaning in, voice low. "I've never seen anyone manipulate a room like that." The billionaire nodded slowly. "Not just manipulate. She's in control. Every interaction, every glance, every word, it's a calculated move. And the worst part? I can't predict it." Across the room, Corin paused near a table of young socialites, their laughter shrill, superficial. One of them tossed a casual remark about the billionaire, his wealth, his arrogance, his reputation. Corin tilted her head slightly, listening, her eyes scanning their subtle body language, noting their assumptions. With the softest, most controlled smile, she stepped closer. "Excuse me," she said, voice calm, deliberate. "You seem to admire influence, yet you dismiss its source. Sometimes the most powerful force is the one you least expect." The young woman blinked, confused, caught between irritation and curiosity. Corin didn't wait for a response. She simply placed the tray down, adjusted a chair with perfect grace, and moved on, leaving a ripple of quiet tension in her wake. A subtle message had been sent. The room had shifted. The billionaire watched, impressed and slightly unsettled. Later, she returned to his table, her gaze locking with his. "Sir," she said softly, "tonight's game is no longer just about observation. It's about trust. And trust is the most difficult move to master." He raised an eyebrow. "Trust? In a restaurant?" She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Trust is everywhere, sir. In business, in life, in strategy. And some trust cannot be earned through wealth or arrogance. It must be proven through action." Her words were deliberate, but layered. The billionaire leaned forward, intrigued, caught off guard by the depth of meaning. "And you trust me?" he asked, testing her, curious. Corin tilted her head, considering. "Not yet. But I intend to see how capable you are of being aware. Of being patient. of noticing the moves that are invisible. It was a subtle challenge, yet it struck him harder than any overt insult could. He realized that she wasn't just playing a game, she was playing him. And he was both fascinated and frustrated by it. The rest of the evening unfolded like a series of delicate moves in a high-stakes match. Corin guided conversations, corrected misconceptions, and subtly exposed arrogance without confrontation. Each table became a board, every patron a pawn in a game he couldn't fully predict. And all the while, she maintained the perfect balance of calm authority and gentle charm. At one point, the billionaire reached out, unable to resist the pull of curiosity. "Corin," he said, voice steady, "you're testing me. Aren't you?" She met his gaze evenly, unflinching. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm testing the world around me. The difference is, you noticed. That's a move." He leaned back, absorbing her words. Her ability to control the room, to influence perceptions without even seeming to try, was mesmerizing. But more than that, it was disarming. He realized, painfully, that every time he thought he was ahead, she had already shifted the board. Every move he anticipated, she anticipated first. As the night drew to a close, she returned to his table one final time. "Sir," she said softly, "remember this: arrogance is loud. Observation is silent. And those who watch carefully always win." He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. Not the arrogance of a man used to winning, but the fascination of someone being challenged in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Remarkable," he said quietly. "You're remarkable." Corin's eyes held his for a moment, steady, unyielding. Then she turned, moving back into the restaurant, every step precise, every gesture deliberate. She had made her move. And he realized, with a mixture of admiration and dread, that the game was far from over. That night, alone in his penthouse, the billionaire stared at the chessboard, finally understanding the depth of what Corin had done. She hadn't just beaten him. She had shown him a new game entirely, a game where wealth, arrogance, and status meant nothing, and where intelligence, observation, and subtlety ruled every move. And for the first time, he felt the exhilarating, terrifying awareness that he was no longer in control. She was. The weekend brought a special crowd to the luxury restaurant: celebrities, entrepreneurs, and socialites who treated the place like their personal stage. Corin moved among them with calm authority, her every gesture deliberate, her presence quietly commanding. Tonight, she was not just serving. She was observing, calculating, influencing, and preparing for a move that would leave everyone in awe. The billionaire sat at his corner table, fingers drumming lightly against the mahogany. He had been tracking her for days now, following every subtle interaction, every quiet maneuver, every flicker of her gaze. And yet, he felt unprepared. Every time he thought he had predicted her, she shifted the board, quietly and elegantly. "She's different," the Korean entrepreneur muttered again, leaning close. "She's controlling the room without even trying." The billionaire nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on Corin as she approached a table of influential tech investors. One of them, a brash young man, had been attempting to dominate the conversation, dismissing suggestions and opinions with arrogance. Corin, moving with her signature calm, leaned slightly forward and offered a subtle correction. Her words were soft, almost casual, but they carried precision and authority that left the young man momentarily speechless. The room seemed to hold its breath. Patrons glanced at each other, sensing a shift in power. The young man, flustered, tried to regain control, but Corin's timing, tone, and presence were flawless. Within moments, she had transformed his attempt at dominance into quiet admiration, while the other investors leaned in, intrigued and impressed. The billionaire watched, a slow smile forming, tinged with both respect and unease. He realized that her skill wasn't just in subtlety, it was in public manipulation without humiliation. She could disarm arrogance without confrontation, and it was mesmerizing to witness. Then, she turned toward his table. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between them.
The game was about to escalate. Corin approached, carrying a tray of champagne flutes.
"Sir," she said softly, placing them before him, "I believe the next move belongs to you."
He raised an eyebrow. And what would that move be?
She leaned slightly closer, voice calm, precise.
Observe. React. Understand. Influence without interference. The game is no longer between us, it's among all who are present. Can you keep up? The billionaire's pulse quickened.
For the first time, he felt the thrill of genuine challenge, not in business, not in wealth, not in power, but in intellect, subtlety, and observation.
He realized he was both participant and audience in a game that Corin had designed with masterful skill.
Across the room, she orchestrated subtle interactions. A casual comment here, a quiet correction there, a carefully timed gesture that shifted perception without anyone noticing overtly. She exposed arrogance, rewarded insight, and redirected attention, all without drawing attention to herself. Patrons found themselves laughing, agreeing, or re-evaluating their assumptions, unaware that they were part of a carefully constructed game. The final twist came as Corin approached the table of the brash tech investor again. With the softest of smiles, she offered him a piece of advice so perfectly timed, so precise, that the entire table leaned in, astonished. He blinked, humbled, and nodded, a rare expression of respect replacing his previous arrogance. The billionaire leaned back, exhaling slowly. He realized, with a mixture of admiration and discomfort, that Corin had just orchestrated a public spectacle in which she controlled the perception of everyone in the room. And he had been watching, utterly captivated. She returned to his table, eyes meeting his with quiet authority. "Observation, sir," she said softly, "is more than seeing, it's understanding, predicting, and influencing. Remember, the best moves are often invisible to those who expect only loud action." He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, tinged with both respect and challenge. "Remarkable," he said quietly. "Truly remarkable." Corin collected her tray, moving away with effortless grace, leaving the billionaire to reflect on the subtle public triumph she had orchestrated. For the first time, he realized that the game had evolved. It was no longer about individual moves. It was about perception, influence, and control in a social arena he had never mastered. That night, as he returned to his penthouse, the city lights stretching infinitely before him, he stared at the chessboard from the first game. It remained untouched, a relic of an earlier challenge. But the lesson it carried had deepened. Corin wasn't just a player, she was a strategist, a master of perception, and a force he had yet to fully comprehend. And for the first time, he understood something both thrilling and terrifying. The game had only just begun, and the next evening, the luxury restaurant was alive with the subtle hum of wealth and sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow, but the real brilliance in the room belonged to Corin. Every movement she made carried authority and grace, yet there was an intensity tonight that hadn't been present before. Tonight, the game would leave no one untouched. The billionaire sat at his usual corner table, leaning slightly forward, fingers brushing the edge of his untouched chessboard. He had followed her moves for days, tracking subtle shifts, watching her orchestrate influence without overt confrontation. And yet, a strange unease gnawed at him. He realized she wasn't just challenging him publicly or socially, she was about to challenge him personally. "She's remarkable," the Korean entrepreneur muttered, his voice low, leaning in. "Every move is deliberate, and she knows exactly what she's doing." "Yes," the billionaire replied, eyes fixed on Corin. "And I think she's about to change everything for me." "But how?" Across the room, Corin approached his table with the same calm authority she had shown countless times, yet her eyes held something different tonight, a flicker of knowing, of subtle challenge. "Sir," she said softly, placing a tray of glasses before him, "I believe you've been observing, predicting, even trying to influence without truly understanding. You've done well, but now, it's time for a deeper move." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what is that?" She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm yet edged with authority. "A game of humility. A challenge not of perception, but of reflection. Can you let go of arrogance, even for a moment? Can you acknowledge what you don't see?" The billionaire paused, unaccustomed to being addressed in such a direct, thoughtful manner. Most people in his world either deferred to him or flattered him.
Corin did neither.
She forced him to confront his assumptions and his ego, and he felt both unsettled and captivated.
I'm
listening, he said slowly, voice steady but measured.
Corin smiled faintly. Then watch.
Observe, but not for advantage.
Notice, but not to dominate.
Your task is to understand without control, to see without judgment.
Only then will you truly comprehend the board. For the next hour, she moved through the restaurant, guiding interactions, subtly influencing perceptions, and orchestrating outcomes without overt action.
Patrons laughed, agreed, or reconsidered assumptions, entirely unaware they were part of her design. The billionaire watched intently, trying to absorb, understand, and resist the subtle manipulation, but every time he thought he was ahead, she had already adjusted the dynamics. At one point, she paused, looking directly at him, and offered a simple statement: your wealth and status are irrelevant here. Influence is invisible, patience is strength, and humility is power. Her words struck him harder than any move on a chessboard, any deal in a boardroom. He realized that in the quietest moments, the smallest gestures, she had been teaching him more than strategy, she had been teaching him perspective, patience, and awareness. As the night drew to a close, Corin returned to his table one final time. Sir, she said softly, the true challenge is not winning or losing. The true challenge is understanding yourself, and knowing that sometimes, the most powerful moves are invisible to those blinded by arrogance. The billionaire leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time in years, he felt humbled, not humiliated, not defeated, but profoundly aware of his own limitations and blind spots. He realized that Corin had orchestrated a personal victory without confrontation, without spectacle, and without pride. He studied her carefully, admiration and curiosity mingling with the faintest trace of awe. Remarkable, he said quietly. You've changed my perspective. Corin's eyes met his, steady, unyielding, yet filled with a subtle warmth. Then the game has been worth playing. And with that, she returned to her duties, leaving the billionaire to contemplate not just the public games she had orchestrated, but the personal challenge she had laid before him, a challenge that no wealth, no power, and no arrogance could have prepared him for. That night, alone in his penthouse, he stared at the chessboard from their first game. It had remained untouched for days, yet its significance had transformed. He realized the lesson was no longer about winning or losing, but about perception, patience, and humility. Corin had not just played a game. She had changed him.